Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new session of Room for Discussion. Centuries ago, France had its last revolution, but a new revolution might be on the rise, coming Sunday when France chooses its next president. Which direction this revolution might go is up to the French voters. They have a clear choice. On the one hand, nationalist Le Pen, she calls globalization a threat to French jobs. She insists to cut the flow of immigrants coming to France, and she also agonizes the European Union by calling it an anti-democratic monster. On the other side, we have Macron, former banker and now leader of Marche. He believes that globalization and the European Union are rather an opportunity for France, and he also has big plans to reform the French economy. One thing that both candidates have in common is that they don't run for the political parties that have governed the country for the past 40 years. We will begin this interview by analyzing how the political landscape in France has changed over the years. Then we will dive into the current candidates, and we will end by discussing how these elections have an influence on the future of the European Union. We will do this with our two honorable guests. First, Renaud Girard. He's a very respected writer and journalist for Le Figaro, one of the biggest newspapers in France. Then we have Saskia Houttuin. She is a French-Dutch journalist and maker of the radio documentary Bureau Buitenland for VPRO. Before we welcome our guest, don't forget to ask your audience questions to Chris, the man with the microphone. And you can also ask your questions through Twitter using the hashtag RFD. Let's hear it for our two guests, Renaud Girard and Saskia Houttuin.
Mr. Girard, Mrs. Houttuin, welcome on my behalf as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Girard, you just arrived from Paris yesterday. How is the vibe? Are people excited for the elections? Are they anxious? Are they fed up with it?
There's less vibe than for the first round, because in the first round, for the first time in French history, you had like 4 horses running.
It was very exciting race.
And nobody knew really who would come first, and nobody knew if the polls would be accurate, because you have also these competing polls, which are called big data polls. It appeared that the normal polls were accurate, and that we had Emmanuel Macron and then Marine Le Pen. But it was believed that Marine Le Pen would get the first rank, and she did not. So that was a little surprise. And now there's less surprise, of course, because all the polls give 60-40, 59-41. So it's not Macron, it's not tight like you had tight elections in 2007 between Sarkozy and Ségolène Royal, and in 2012 between
Mrs.
Sarkozy
Houttuin,
and
how
Hollande.
do people in Grenoble, that's where your family comes from, right? The southeast part of France.
Yeah.
Are people there really anxious for these elections? Or?
Well, yes, I was born in Grenoble, which is close to the Italian and Swiss border. Actually, last time I was there was to visit my grandmother, who still lives there in November. And what I know of Grenoble is it's the only big city in France who has a green mayor, so they're quite on the left side, leaning on the left side. I think most people voted Macron and Hamon over there. But around that, it's more on the right side, so it's more Fillon, Le Pen. So there's quite a division, which is also a bit good representation, I think, of France, how, in big cities they vote quite differently than in la périphérie, à la campagne. I must say, I think Grenoble is like any other big city, larger city in France.
No consensus, really divided.
It's quite divided, but I'm pretty sure most people will vote Macron in Grenoble. For the rest of France, I'm not sure.
We'll dive into the current candidates later in the interview, but first it would be good to have a look at how the political landscape in France has changed over the years, or even how the image of France has changed over the years. Because a lot of books have been written about this. L'identité malheureuse, le suicidé français, comprendre le malheur français. Mr. Girard, is France having an identity crisis?
Yes, France have actually two two crises. There's an identity crisis, when you see more and more women with some kind of
With the
Islamic
headscarves.
hijab on the head that did not exist at all, and 40 years ago, even within the Muslim community. And there's a second crisis. There's, I think, actually three crises. There's a unemployment crisis. I mean, you know, for like, since the war, France and Germany were sticking. They were parallel. And then now, reforms have been made in Germany, 2000, the arts reforms, and no reforms were done in France. So France is declining, if you like. There's a problem of debt, there's a problem of unemployment, there's a problem of departure of investors, and the third problem is also maybe psychological, that you were like noting. It's a decline in the, as you said, the grandeur de la France. Or the, I mean, you know, in the 60s, for instance, de Gaulle's France was, without question, the #1 country in Europe.
The center of the world.
Important, yes, the most important, the leader of Europe. And Germany was only an economic power. Now it's different. I mean, Vladimir Putin had a meeting, I think yesterday, with Merkel in Sochi. I don't know if the meeting were very friendly, but what I know is that he said that Germany was the only country which had some weight or value in his eyes in Europe. Thank you for France.
Yeah. Do you see that as well, Ms. Houttuin, that France has trouble coping with this idea that they're not the center of Europe anymore?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's a bit of a sexy subject, you could say. I mean, they even have a word for it now in the Larousse, which is the French version of the Vandalen woordenboek, déclinisme. So, yeah, of course, you just said, you know, there are many books that have been written about that. You know, I don't think every French person wakes up in the morning thinking, oh my gosh, France is going down. And
my identity is lost.
But I think it's something, and for me it's interesting to see, because I'm as French as Renaud Girard is, and as French as other French people are, but I see things more from the outside, from an European perspective, because I don't live there. And I think, well, you know, they refuse to get used to the fact that we live in a globalized world that by getting together with Germany, especially from the late 80s, early 90s, to make a deal about the euro, that there will be consequences, and they are not as big as they used to be. So yes, of course, that's I think also why Le Pen and Macron are doing so well, because Le Pen promises to go back to the old France, and Macron promises to get further and to get big again, but within the context of the EU.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting, and I think that is one of the biggest themes from this election. Yes, for sure.
The loss of
The electoral map of France is very easy to understand. All the cities and the regions, especially the West regions, which are well integrated in the global world, in the mondialisation, they vote for Macron. They vote for Europe. All the regions and all the villages that have been stricken by unemployment, not like Grenoble. Grenoble is a very, you know, scientific city, very vibrant.
So you would say it's an economic division.
Yeah. And it's an economic division. Everywhere where you have deindustrialization, you know, industrial wrecks, like the northeast, the east, all these regions have voted against Europe. So it means that for Le Pen or for Mélenchon. This is very simple. These regions were the region which is the elections of 1885 were voting for the left, because it was workers and so on, and the west of the country was voting for the royalists, for the monarchists. You know, in 1885, and you had still monarchists in France. It has changed totally, because all the working classes have been in France have been struck by globalization, by mondialization. It's something
So
that you
if I
don't
may
know in your
conclude
country.
you,
But
you would say one of the issues of the lose of grandeur might be economic performance. And we see that, as you said, unemployment rate is at 10%, GDP growth rate hasn't gone up at 1% for many years now. Could you summarize the economic problem that is causing this, Mr. Girard?
I mean, it's very simple. I mean, France has a debt of 2,000 billion euros.
Yes.
And people ask, but what kind of war, what kind of plague, what kind of tsunami we had to fight? And yes, you can tell me, but Japan has a bigger debt, but Britain has the same kind of debt.
But what is
as
the
you.
problem with the debt?
But-
That it has to be incurred with high taxes, or?
But we have to compare it because we decided to make an economy very close to Germany. We asked for the euros. It's not the Germans who came with the tanks in Paris and said, you will get the euro. No, no, no. We went to beg them to take the euro because it was a political idea after the reunification of Germany by Mitterrand that, you know, okay, Germany will be big, very big, strong, but they will share the same currency with us. And then we did not abide by the rules that we fixed for Europe, which is the 3% of the GDP. So there's this big problem. Why France cannot reform when Germany can? This is as simple as that.
Because after the crisis of 2008, we've seen many countries reforming their economies, pushing through tough economic reforms like Germany, the Netherlands. Why has France always been this reluctant to make economic reforms? Ms. Houttuin?
Well, I mean, this is not just a German-French thing. I mean, you could even say it's this division between the north and the south of Europe. I think, yeah, my microphone's working. So, you know, Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Greece, of course, Greece. So, I think the main reason is the fact that
Are they afraid of
well-
strikes, or is
well,
that why
I mean,
they
of
wanna-
course, yes. We
Because
saw
there's
it
a
with
strong left
Macron.
wing in France, we all think. here in the
Exactly, we saw it
Netherlands.
with Macron when he pushed his loi de finance
Oui.
last year. People went on the streets and burning tires and shutting down everything. So, of course, that's very complicated. But I also think, I mean, okay, we set up these rules for the 3%, and France, I think, hasn't really even came close to that for the last 10 years. But what does that show? Does that show that France is reluctant to live by those rules, or is there a problem with these rules? And should Germany and France come together and see how they, you know, will change this? Because I don't think the problem will be solved for France if they abide by the rules that Germany and Brussels.
Do you
proposing them.
agree with that, Mr. Girard? Is France reluctant to make economic reforms because it feels like working for the Prussian king, as some French might say?
Yeah, the thing is that, you see, it's not only the Prussian king, because we have a king, you know. France is governed by a king. It's not like governed by the House of Commons. It's different. And the problem is we had not very good kings since Pompidou and de Gaulle. Giscard was a demagogic king. He said that, you know, he was right-wing. He said that over 40% of public expenses, a country was becoming socialist. He took it at 35, he left it at 42. So he didn't pursue a right-wing policy, actually, when Thatcher did it in 79. Mitterrand came, and Mitterrand was interested, he was a little bit what we call désinvolte, I don't know the word in English. He was
Neither do
not
I.
taking care, he was taking care of big issues, like helping Germany when it had problem with SSSR, USSR, things like that. But not state problems, social security, all that boring. Okay. And then you had Chirac. He was a lazy king. We had lazy kings before the medieval arts. It's in the Rois Fainéants. It was in the 7th, 8th century. Doing nothing, just nothing, okay? And then you had Sarkozy, the what we called caractériel, excited king, you know, the guy, just, okay. And then we had Hollande, nice king, good sense of humor, but just incapable of taking one decision. He always agrees with you, but cannot take a decision.
Oh, he started on the left and then tried to move a little bit on the right, and then he lost both. And that's how Hamon
And it's totally
only had 7%.
so totally indecisive.
Yeah.
So with this kind of governments, of captains, yes, the ship is not going so well. And if you compare to Germany, the level of the chancellors, more steadiness.
So is it that you're saying the lack of economic reforms is rather the fault of the leaders rather than people going on the streets and pushing against these reforms?
Yes, but you have to, yes, it's true that we don't have an asset that Germany has after the war, not the whole Germany, but after the war, where the unions were cooperating very much with the employers, okay? This kind of économie sociale de marché built in Germany. I don't know the way, social market economy, I mean, you know, which was invented in Germany after the Second World War.
Protectionism,
Yeah. So we don't have that, and we have more radical unions, which are minority. Only 11% of workers vote for these elections for the unions. So they are a minority, but very active, and leaders are afraid of them. Yeah. And actually, there is no right wing in France. The program of the right wing of Juppé au Fillon is left of Bernie Sanders. I mean, there is no. I mean,
so right in France is completely different than right in the United States or the Netherlands.
It's a socialist country which used to work well and which works not so well now.
But don't you think that the Germans and also from Brussels, the economic policy they ask from France and for other countries is too rigid, which is also a cause of the problem and a reason why France has this big deficit and can't seem to be able to tackle unemployment? Because
France is spending too much on its welfare state and on its state. The level of public expenditures in France is 10 points of GDP higher than in Germany. Do hospitals are better in France than in Germany? No, they are equally good. Are roads better in France than in Germany? No, they are equally good. Are high schools better in France than in Germany? No, they are equals. But France spent 10 points of GDP more than the Germans. There is a problem. The state is totally obese, okay, and not very efficient. Okay. There is a lack of authority, and we took a strange law under the socialist government just in beginning of 2000.
Okay, quite interesting on that.
35 hours, which is...
It would be maybe interesting to move on and have a look on how the image of the mainstream political parties has changed.
Because it seems right now that France people are really fed up with politicians. I mean, the current president, Hollande, only has a popularity rate of 4%. There are now 2 political candidates who are from the non-traditional parties, and it is expected by the economists that 30% of the people won't even show up to vote. Mr. Girard, why are people in France fed up with politicians?
It's very simple, because the country was not well managed. If you have a bad director of this university or a bad CEO of a company, I mean, no CEOs would have stayed at the French, as a French captain for more than 2 years with such bad management. I mean, just compare the GDP by habitant between this country, the Netherlands, and France. I mean, probably 40 years ago it was the same. Now there's a big difference. So these parties, the right-wing parties, the so-called right-wing parties, and the Socialist Party, have not well managed the country. They have been fired. Bye-bye.
They voted away, literally.
Okay, we take, so the poor's the left over the abandoned by the mondialization, by the globalization, they vote for
Le Pen.
Le Pen. They were voting also for Mélenchon. Huh? They made it's 20%. And there's a lot of passerelles, of bridges between the far right and the far left in France. Yeah. And the young, what we call bobo, bourgeois bohème, like in Grenoble, they vote for Macron because they want, this young guy will manage the country better.
Yeah, because Mrs. Houttuin, you interviewed a lot of young Le Pen voters who claim to be looking for something new. Are the young voters going to make a difference in these elections? Are they the ones that feel really fed up with politicians?
Well, if we look at the data from the 2015 departmental elections, then we see that not many young people go to the ballot, but most of them voted for Le Pen. So it seems to me, I mean, it was for departmental elections, which is different, that the Le Pen voters are quite active. Also, there are a lot of young people that voted Mélenchon, and there's another problem there over there, because Mélenchon, by not being very clear what he's going to do, he said, I'm not voting for Le Pen, but he didn't really make clear if he's going to cast a blank vote or if he's going to vote for Macron. So there's this movement among young people that is, I mean, I read that sentence over and over the past few days, ni Le Pen, ni Macron, ni patrie, ni patron, which means...
there's also a hashtag about it on Twitter that's going viral. Yeah.
So what I noticed in November when I was in Grenoble, but I also went to Vienne, which is a more rural area north of Grenoble, I met Le Pen militants, so people that not just vote for Front National, but also are very active within the party. And they told me that, I mean, this is a generation that grows up who maybe have voted for Sarkozy or Hollande before, but that sees around them that nothing really changed for them. And I think we just talked about unemployment. Unemployment among the average French people is around 10%, but amongst young people it's way higher. 25%. It's around, I mean, can you imagine? A quarter of the French young adults has no jobs, or not even a perspective for a job. So of course they are looking for a solution. And well, what I think Le Pen does quite well, she blames either the patrons, so the big industries, the financial world, actually everything that Macron stands for, and also foreigners. So not just Muslims, because Islam, of course, is a very sensitive topic of debate, but also immigration, you know. I mean, when in 2015 we had this, a lot of people from Syria going through Turkey and Greece towards Europe. I mean, most of them went to Germany, or to Sweden, or to the Netherlands, and just a small percentage went to France. But still, she was able to make it a big point.
To make it a threat, to make it feel like a threat.
Exactly, and then, of course, these horrible attacks also happened, which made it even heavier and more complicated. So, yeah, when you look at young voters, I mean, so many of the things that are happening in France and in the world is affecting them, that I'm not really surprised that many of them vote for Le Pen.
Yeah.
I mean,
and what you always see as well is that in times of crisis, people always look for a strong leader, just as in the midst of the 20th century when France was in democratic crisis. People chose de Gaulle, and he reformed the democracy and installed the Fifth Republic. You can say that France is currently also in a crisis. It's struggling with its identity, it's struggling with its economy, doesn't know how to fix it. Would you say, Mr. Girard, that France now is in need of a new strong leader such like de Gaulle?
Of course, the situation is not as bad as in '58, you know, where we had a colonial war and we had the kind of insurrection of the army and so on. But there's kind of a slow decline, and people are not stupid. I mean, French, the solutions are all over the newspapers. Everybody knows the solution for France, but nobody has the courage to take the decisions. This is the problem. Hollande knew perfectly well the solutions, but still he did this, you know, demagogic tax of 75%, like just having, like, as a consequence of all the the rich investors just left France because, you know, in Europe now you can go to the Netherlands, for instance, which is a tax haven for companies.
But feel the people the need for this new leader.
I think that people are waiting for a reformer. Macron, people think, oh, maybe it's this leftist Thatcher. He will reform the country. Okay, he's very young, he has no experience.
But his policies seem really unclear as well.
He thinks that Guyane is an island, though it's it's in South America. It's not an island. He makes blunders, but still is quite energetic. He's knowledgeable. He went to the best universities, and people said, yes, maybe this young guy will have the energy to transform the country and to adapt it, to make a country which is not which copes with globalization as your country does, or as Denmark does,
open up its
or
economy.
as Germany does.
Yeah, Macron might help France forward, but maybe let's go to the audience as well. Is there an audience question on the current changing identity of France, on the economic problems? Yes.
Well, I actually want to go to the first part, because what I hear for half an hour right now is an agency approach to the problems, which is quite natural because there's an election going on. But in the first part about the modern history of France, it was also about agency, de Gaulle, Mitterrand and Pompidou. But I would like to hear more about the system, about the Fifth Republic, and in how far you think that the Fifth Republic is an impediment for France to take good decisions and to create a good system in which you don't have a presidential monarchy, but more a, well, let's say democracy. Well, France is still a democracy, but more democratic, more consensus-based.
And to whom do you ask this question?
The Sir of La Figaro.
So your question, if you summarize it, is the system still, is the political system still adapted to the situation? Yeah. People are starting asking questions, because when you have a strong leader like de Gaulle, when he came to power, he asked the parliament in '58 special powers to decide by what we call les ordonnances, that it's laws that the executive powers can take, okay? And all the reforms that were on the shelves, because France has got a very good high civil service, so we know what reforms we can do, but they are just shelved. So de Gaulle took all the reforms out of the shelves, say, I decide everything, and then he made all the reforms by ordonnance, not discussed law, just ordonnance, and he reformed France, and it worked very well, actually. It worked very well. So if you have a president with a strong leadership, a strong support, who just governs like this, it works. But if you don't have good leaders, if you don't have good kings, which happened like Louis XVI, or if you have bad kings, it doesn't work well. And then you can say, oh, but the British system maybe is better, because the British system basically is the House of Commons which governs. And if the Prime Minister is getting too far, it happened to Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister is fired. So, or it happened to Tony Blair, you know, after his invasion of Iraq, he was fired.
But the president cannot be fired.
The president cannot be fired, and is the main political force. And so, this is the problem. And it's true that people start thinking, oh, does this Fifth Republic work so well? But at the same time, people also think that other democracies are not changing all the time. I mean, the American democracy didn't change for the last 2 centuries. The British democracy did not change at all. Yes, they changed a little bit, and it was a catastrophe when they imported this stupid Latin idea of referendum, and it make a catastrophe that you all know. But why we should change our constitution every 40 years or 50 years? I mean, it's a problem.
Reform at the time, you can always also say, right?
I think the challenge is also because they went from the 4th to the 5th Republique because of the question of Algeria mainly. And of course the 4th Republic was paralyzed all the time. So what do you do? And I think that's the main challenge, to maybe get more in the direction of a 4th Republic that is a little bit more democratic and not as, doesn't give as much power to the president, but without going back to that situation where no decision can be taken.
Yeah.
Exactly, immobility. Yeah. So I think if Macron is elected, that will be something, especially also with his plans for Europe, that will be on the table.
The president is powerful when he has the parliament with him, because it's still a parliamentary system. It's not the American system in France. Huh? There's the Article 20 of the Constitution, which says, le gouvernement détermine et conduit la politique de la nation. The government decides, sketches, if you like, and leads the policy of the nation. So, normally, the prime minister have all the powers, but is not elected by the people. Since the president is elected by the people, he takes all the decisions. When the prime minister is appointed by him with National Assembly supporting the president. If in the June election,
the parliamentary election,
the parliamentary election, people, which I think is unlikely, change their mind. Okay, we fired Fillon because he had the corruption problem, money problems, but we still want the right wing. So we'll put the right wing party in power. And so they will have, Macron will be compelled to appoint a right-wing prime minister, and he will make the policy. The only field that Macron will keep for himself, in that case, which already existed twice in French history, he will keep foreign policy and defense for himself. Do you get it? It's a little bit complicated.
Very interesting point, Ms.
Thank
Girard.
you very much for your question. Maybe let's dive a little bit more into the current candidates, because we have, on the one hand, Macron, who started his political party only last year, and on the other, who is considered an outsider because he only started this party last year. And we have Le Pen, who is also considered an outsider because she is far right-wing. But I really want to know, are these two candidates specifically outsiders? Are they actually outsiders? Or do they just profile themselves because it seems beneficial to say that they stand out from the traditional political parties?
I'd say the latter, definitely. I mean, Marine Le Pen comes from a long tradition. I mean, we all know her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who has headed the Front National for decades. So, of course, the Front National always was a party that was really on the far right, and they never actually were elected, so they could always, do whatever they want, but without actually doing anything on a political level. And now we see how little by little, there are some FN mayors now, for example, Steve Briouat in Beaumont, the most famous one, I guess. And she's also moving slightly
towards the middle.
Towards the center. But also the right is moving towards her, which makes her ideas, who are still quite extreme, you could say, really extreme, make them more normal, more accepted. So, and also, I mean, she's from an outsider, but she's a politician, she's a political woman. She knows exactly how politics works. So that doesn't really make her that different. The only thing is she doesn't come from the traditional left-right system. Yeah. Macron is a bit the same thing. I mean, he used to be a banker, not for a very long time, and then he worked for different departments within several ministries, and then
for Hollande,
and then he became a minister. But I mean, can you imagine? Even without, he wasn't part of the Socialist Party, but he was within the Socialist government, and he had one of the most important posts. So he was a minister on a very unpopular government. He took some very unpopular measures, and what I think is super interesting is that he quit. He said, "Okay, I'm going to start this movement, En Marche." Go forward, and then I'm going to present myself as the new Obama or the new Justin Trudeau. And miraculously, that worked. I mean, even though Le Pen and her surroundings are saying, her campaign is saying, don't trust him. He's the son of Hollande, and
But Hollande even said about him as well, Emmanuel Macron, c'est moi.
Macron, exactly. I'm not sure he was very happy about that, but especially because, of course, the way he wanted to present himself was as something different. And even though within the socialist government he was way too much on the right side, I mean, he is definitely
A liberalist.
he's a liberalist.
Yeah.
I mean, he takes some things from the right, more of the right wing, especially on economic policy, but on social things more on the left. He is something that France has never had before as a president. So it doesn't even matter if Macron or Le Pen will win. There will definitely be a presidency as has never been seen before.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Mr. Girard?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Macron has got the magics because he comes from the system. He comes from the school of the system, which is called École nationale d'administration. He went to what we call un grand corps, the inspection des finances, where, you know, like Giscard from the inspection des finances, Alain Juppé is from the inspection des finances, Hollande is kind of some other kind of inspection des finances, and so on. They're all, so it's totally from the system. Then he went to make money. He went to the bank Rothschild. He made quite a lot of money. And then he came back as, not as a small guy in the ministry, as the main advisor of Hollande in the Élysée Palace. Huh? He was the secrétaire général adjoint de l'Élysée. So he was a very top guy in 2000.
Not immediately. I think he had some different...
No, he was appointed in 2012, secrétaire général adjoint de l'Élysée for economic affairs. So he was overseeing all the economic affairs.
And then in 2014,
and
he
then
became minister
he left
himself.
for a while, and then Hollande called him back, and he became a minister. And then he said, "I'm doing something en Marche," with EM, like Emmanuel Macron. There's maybe a little bit of narcissism there, and his initials. And he said, "I'm not the system. I'm anti-system," and it works. And it works also for Marine Le Pen, because even her father was saying, "We are the outsiders. We are fighting this system." And he called that UMPS, because there was, the right-wing party was called UMP, and then the Socialist Party PS, so UMPS. They are in bed together. And it's what they say. And now it's what she says and what she will say tonight in the debate. There's a very important
But the history
debate
of
today.
Macron, do his voters seem to be blind for that, or they just simply don't care about his history, Ms. Houttuin?
They think that he was, sorry, good.
It's fine. Well, I think what we shouldn't forget is that Macron was also very lucky. I mean, I don't think all people forgot about the fact that he was a minister before. Of course they didn't. But, and actually everybody thought that the moderate right candidate would be the one who would be Le Pen's adversary and then become president. But the thing is, Hollande messed up.
Yeah.
And then Hamon became his successor, and he messed up his campaign big time also. And then on the right side, the one we thought, I mean, even the polls thought, would be Le Pen's adversary
Was going to be Fillon.
And then, well, this whole scandal that I think nobody missed here over here, because it was also big news in the Netherlands, was the fact that, exactly, the Penelope Gate, the fact that he paid his wife and also his children as his employers, and then came also the fact that he got these really expensive suits and everything. So this image that people, wanted to get rid of the fact that, that the politicians could just do whatever they want, that benefited Macron also very much.
And we also have the Mélenchon voters who seem to be kind of an issue, because they are the 19% of the voters, but because Mélenchon didn't say that he was going to vote for Macron, or didn't call his people to vote for Macron, is therefore Marine Le Pen also adapting her extreme image to appeal to the voters of Mélenchon? Is that her tactic now?
Well, what I find really interesting is that she realizes that most French people aren't as anti-EU and anti-Euro as her
She is.
program is.
Yeah.
So what she's doing now, it's also on the first front page of Mrs.
Figaro.
Girard's newspaper, is that her stance on the euro is becoming a bit weird, because at first she said, I'm not anti-Europe, but I don't want to be dictated under the dictatorship of Berlin and Brussels. So I want to talk with the EU for 6 months, and then I want to ask the French people what they think.
Yeah.
Now she realized, there was this poll by another French newspaper, Les Echos, which says that I think 3 in 4 French people don't want to leave the euro. So then what to do? I mean, if she wants to become president, then she needs to also have these people that are not exactly anti-EU, but still are maybe tempted by her. So now she's saying all these things that, I mean, it's quite hard to comprehend. I mean, even for the
That seems
specialists at the
hypocritical
Figaro.
almost, right?
She's now saying that,
Yeah.
maybe we should have a currency for the French people, to literally buy their baguettes, and we should have the euro for the big companies.
But
I
where-
mean,
yeah, where Le Pen is changing her tactic to become less anti-EU, Macron is doing the same thing by becoming more strictly on EU,
but he's
right?
going to use that against her tonight, definitely, because
In
she's
the
being so
debates.
vague about it.
Yes. Maybe let's see if there is another audience question about the current candidate specifically.
Hi. Well, my question is actually because the media in general is saying that the elections will be decided by these undecided voters. So I would really like to know your approach towards these voters. Who, like in the last elections, generally, these group of undecided have been really important in the US elections, in these elections. So, how you see that approach into France, and who you think they will move from? And especially the Macron supporters, who will they support? Thank you.
Who are you asking this question to?
To both, actually. I
both
would
of
like to
you.
know both approaches to it. Thanks.
Where are the undecided voters going?
Well, okay, so the polls are now saying that 61% is going to vote for Macron, and the other 39% is going to vote
Le Pen.
for Le Pen. And the polls were quite right. Actually, they were extremely
For the first
precise.
round.
Yeah. It was unbelievable, because after
Yeah,
Trump and Brexit, we
Brexit.
thought, well, who can trust polls? Now in France, you can. But still, it's not entirely sure, because the problem is that the voters on the extreme left that voted Mélenchon are undecided. Some of them will vote for Le Pen, I think, because of her economic policies that were quite close to Mélenchon. Some of them will vote for Macron, even though they don't really support his ideas, but they don't want Le Pen in Élysée. And then there's also a huge group that will boycott the second round of the elections, because they want neither.
And
So
if-
they support neither, so
and
they
if
will
we
cast.
add up all the nationalist parties that got votes in the first round, we have Mélenchon, Dupont, and Le Pen. We almost come at 50%. So is that not very significant? What do you think?
Well, Dupont is the one has now an alliance
As-
with. Yes,
exactly.
exactly. That was, I think, around 5% of the.
Yeah, but
the vote.
together all
But I
three
don't
are
think all the
50.
people that voted for them will now again go to the ballot to vote for her. And also, I mean, I just talked about Mélenchon, but there's also Fillon, that a part of the central right will maybe also vote for Le Pen, and a part will vote for Macron. But still, I mean, taking all of this in consideration, if you add up everything, still the polls say that Macron will win. I think, personally, that it will be a little bit tighter than the Figaro and other newspapers, Ipsos, the big statistics bureau, are now predicting. And I think it can be dangerous, and it was very wrong of Macron to already celebrate at La Rotonde the evening of the first round. And I mean, discussing everywhere that, Macron as president, how will that be? I
Le
mean,
Pen
it's not
anticipated
done
on
yet.
that very much. Yeah.
It's not done yet, but I think we will avoid a Brexit/Trump scenario.
But maybe go
This
back to
time.
the first question, Mr. Girard. Where do you think that the undecided voters are going to go to? Are the Mélenchon voters going
And
to
the
Le
Fillon
Pen, you
voters,
think,
yeah.
or are they going to Macron?
So there is like 2 questions. I mean, there was an abstention of 21% in the first round, which is quite low for a democracy. Will we have an abstention going to 30%? We don't know. This will be very interesting. what will be the abstention. Of course, a lot of Mélenchon, when I say a lot, it would be maybe 20%, but still a lot, of Mélenchon voters will go for Le Pen. I say a lot because Mélenchon in the 2002 elections was the first one to say, we have to stop Jean-Marie Le Pen, fascism is sweeping France, and so on and so on. But now he didn't say we have to vote for Macron. So what about Fillon? A lot of Fillon voters will not vote for Macron. That's for sure.
Is it because he's not too strict on, for example, immigrants and
yes, he's not too strict on Islam, on immigrants, and so on, and will probably abstain because they want to keep the euro, and they think that Marine Le Pen has no economic policy, that economic policy
and Macron's
is just crazy.
Agenda, it looks like Fillon's agenda, if you...
Fillon was the only one to have a really sound and applicable program, not, demagogic, giving, I don't know, there was one guy who said, we are going to give 800 euros to everybody, whatever he does, and so on.
Yeah.
No, like, the only, sound economic program was by Fillon. Macron is more clever than that. He said that I'm not going to be tied by precise economic measures. I am not going to tell you, okay, Social Security will not reimburse you your teeth, because then, I want my teeth to be reimbursed, or my it's exactly what Fillon did, He said for minor diseases, you will not be paid back by the Social Security, only for big diseases. And then his popularity dropped. So Macron is much more clever. His program is very vague. He said, let's love each other. Let's hold hands. I love you. We are great nations. Being together, we are going to do great things.
So you think that after the election, he might become very much more extreme than his policies now suggest?
And then he understood that the presidential election is not the choice of a program, but it's a choice of a man. It's a meeting between a man and a nation, a man and a people. He understood that. He was the first one to understand it, and he understood well, and he campaigned well. He showed energy, he showed entrepreneurship. So people said, okay, his program is vague, but anyway, nobody reads programs. And politicians never apply programs.
And people don't stand by
and
their
so
programs.
we need this guy because he has got some energy and he's young.
Yeah, in all the polls, Macron, of course, now is leading. Also in your own poll in the Figaro, he's up by 59%. But aren't you afraid that we're going to underestimate Le Pen? Maybe also what we did with the Brexit and what happened with Trump. It also seemed to be clear that there wasn't going to be a Brexit, that Hillary was going to be president. Aren't you afraid that the same is going to happen with Le Pen?
I'm personally not afraid because the polls were quite accurate. The electoral system of America is very different. I have to remind you that Hillary Clinton had 3 million votes more than Donald Trump, which of course could not happen in France. So the system and the way Donald Trump campaign is totally, America is totally different. The problem of Marine Le Pen is that she's isolated. She was not able, the problem of Le Front National is that it was never able to make an alliance. Communist Party, or so-called former Communist Party in Italy, came more or less to power when it made an alliance with the socialists. It's called the Parti Démocratique, whatever.
And she doesn't have that. No party wants to cooperate with her.
She has no alliance. And this is something that was made by Mitterrand. Le Front National, the National Front, Le Front National, the Le Pen party, in the 74 election for president, when France was very well-managed country, was 1%, 1%, okay? And then with Mitterrand, Mitterrand promoted the National Front in order to divide the right.
Yeah.
And he made it like perfectly well, and he kept
Okay.
the power.
Very
And-
interesting
and,
point, Mr. Girard, but we have to continue to our next subject. That is the influence of this election on the future of the European Union. Marine Le Pen announced that when she becomes president, she will hold a Frexit referendum within 6 months. How likely is it, do you think, Mrs. Houttuin, that we can see a Frexit in that case?
You mean a Frexit by leaving the EU or the euro? Because that's a big
By
difference.
the European Union.
I mean,
I mean, it's
If-
unclear what she's saying at the moment. That's
no,
true.
I mean, she's not saying she wants to leave the EU. She wants to reform the EU. But I mean, in fact, that means if she can't do that, then it will be like a hard Frexit, like, you know, what is happening now,
Yeah.
more or less between Theresa May and Brussels. So there will definitely be a big fight. Well, the thing is, what I also just said, is that it's quite vague what
Yeah.
she
To
wants.
which Le Pen do we have to listen to? The
I
Le
mean,
Pen
even
for
within the
first round?
party,
Yeah.
within the Front National, there is a division. I mean, there are some people, there's a part of the party that, you know, that don't really care about leaving or staying in the EU because they also see some of the benefits that is in there. And that for them, it's more about borders, about immigration, about Islam, about
They're very
security,
close,
about
related
defense.
to each other, those subjects, I guess.
Yes. I mean,
Immigration.
I think if Le Pen becomes president, of course, she will have the mandate to stand by her promises and by her program. So that will mean she will go to Brussels and try to renegotiate things. I don't think that will work because, well, like we saw with the United Kingdom, I mean, David Cameron tried the same thing, came back, did a referendum, and then, well, we all know what happened. Yeah, but
that's-
it's hard to
that's
say.
a-
I think even if she doesn't want it, and even I think her program more or less forces her to renegotiate with the EU, which won't work, which means that she will leave.
So the anti-EU sentiments that Le Pen maybe anticipated to happen in order to have a Frexit aren't there in France. You think that France would want to stay in the European Union?
Well, most French people, I mean, if we look at the polls, if you look at different, I don't know the English word, enquêtes that were done.
Surveys?
Research surveys, exactly, shows that more people less people are Eurosceptic compared to a couple of years ago. So even though it's not as high as in the Netherlands, I think in the Netherlands it's like 70% that is pro-EU more or less, and in France it's around 55.
Say that Euroscepticism is only bigger in Greece than in France. So I think people in France
There
are
is
still
a lot of
very Eurosceptic.
Euroscepticism, but I mean, Euroscepticism is not the same thing as wanting to leave the EU, because
That's-
what
that's
is the
very much true,
alternative?
yeah.
What is the alternative? I mean, it could also turn out into a big mess. And also, not all people that vote for Le Pen, for the Front National, are anti-EU. I mean, people have different reasons to vote for her and for her party.
And Mr. Girard, if we believe Le Pen for the first round, when she had a much tougher voice, and in case she delivers this Frexit, what do you think will be the consequence for the continent and for France itself?
I mean, this is a pure, it's not very interesting because it's totally hypothetical. We have to say that Macron has to succeed, but it's totally hypothetical. So it's very difficult to discuss. Of course, if France leaves the European Union will not exist anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the death of the European Union. European
Stronger
Union
consequence of Brexit, for example,
was
yeah.
done by the Communauté Européenne du Charbon et de l'Acier, you know, between Germany and France in the beginning of the 50s, so that they don't stop making war together. So this is, of course, if France leaves, but it's not the subject
hard.
today. It's
Yeah.
not.
It's not.
But
It's not
is
the
it-
matter
not playing in
today.
France.
It's
But
not
is
at all a question.
Is the European Union going to reform to the demands of France? Because that is something that both Macron and Le Pen want, right? That the European Union has to reform.
Yes, European Union has to reform. I mean, it's quite obvious, but it's even obvious for Dutch people that European Union has to reform. Why? For instance, in March 2000, there was the Lisbon agenda, who was decided, and it was that, okay, Europe will become the main knowledge economy of the world, some a huge California, if you like. Nothing was done at all. Nothing was achieved. And in the crisis of 2008, for instance, this crisis, the European banks had no responsibility at all. There is no subprimes in Europe. It came from the US, but European leaders were totally unable to explain to European voters, including the Dutch.
So that has
Where
to
does
change.
it come? No, it's very important. Where does it come from? And what I'm going to do, me, President of the Commission, to help you, citizens of Europe, with this crisis coming from America. Nobody did that. So there's a big crisis of leadership in Europe. Mr. Juncker, Mrs. Mogherini, Mr. Tusk doesn't mean anything for you or for me. Nothing. It's the governments of Europe decided to appoint like mediocracy, the worst people, I mean, not competent people, no leaders, because they wanted to keep some kind of powers. This is a huge crisis. It has to change. And
But this is not the problem that all countries want a different kind of change, and that because of that you don't have consensus.
And that's
cannot
already
reform.
happening from what I heard from someone who knows way more about EU politics than I do, Mathieu Segers, the dean of Maastricht University. He told me actually that Berlin and Paris are talking for years now, and that is they're already planning a reform of the EU. Maybe that will turn out into a new treaty, but you know, when David Cameron came with his Brexit promises way before the referendum, people already thought, okay, we should really do something. So there is already a system that is being set up about a Europe of multiple paces.
Exactly.
Speeds, exactly.
Where different countries can reform with each other if they
Exactly.
want to.
I mean, we will see, and maybe that will also create a bit more of a division between the North and the South when it comes to economic policies. That some countries will integrate a bit more on different parts, on trade or on
Other
economic
countries just want
policies,
a
on
single market
migration, on
and no one
borders.
to integrate any much. Yeah.
Exactly, because I mean we've been talking now for the German-French axis now for most of the time, but I mean the fact that the EU expanded to the east is also part of the problem, you could say. I mean, because we see now that there are different countries with different economic policies, but also different views on human rights or democracy. So, I mean, the EU really needs to be reformed, and France and Berlin and Germany really know that, and they're already talking about it. But I hope they will do it quickly, because people are, well, I mean, we've seen that
Yeah, it's a huge problem
populist
at
parties.
the moment. Yeah.
Well,
we're seeing that,
exactly.
yeah.
Well, let's see if there is a final audience question. Maybe we still have time for that. There's one over there in the audience.
Yes, hi. I would like to ask both guests if you could possibly frame the presidential election in the context of the parliamentary election that's coming up later this year. Whether you're afraid, the main issue is whether you're afraid of the deadlock of the president being elected from a completely different party and not being able to work with the parliament and nothing changing for the next 5 years.
Yeah, of course, there could be a deadlock. We had this system before, it's called a cohabitation, but it will be helped by the fact that Macron said, I'm neither from the left nor from the right. So, yes, we will see. He will have to find a prime minister supported by a majority of the MPs in the National Assembly. Then it will depend on him, still Macron, and on this prime minister, what kind of guy he chooses. If he chooses somebody from the old political class, I am not optimistic. I'm quite pessimistic. If he finds somebody else, maybe from la société civile, how do you say that in English? Civil society? Civil society. Maybe if he finds somebody totally different, an entrepreneur, somebody totally different, it could work. But if it takes kind of, classical politician, I don't believe it will work.
What do you think, Ms. Houttuin?
Well, I mean, the elections are so different. I mean, people now vote for, you know, like the new big man or big woman to be the president, whereas for the Assemblée, it's more on a local, regional level. So Macron now has the impossible task to find people for his party in all these different regions in France. So that will not happen. So he will have to try to work together with the left and the right, but he said he's neither. So that's quite complicated. So I think it will be hard for him to find a majority that will be able to work with him and do a cohabitation like happened under Mitterrand in the late 80s. Or you will have the problem that he will work together with the left and the right, and then the thing that Marine Le Pen is working against, the thing that we just call the UMPS, will be the reality, because then you will have the left and the right working together, being one party, one government, and then that will be a big issue, I think, for in 5 years from now.
I'm sorry, we're actually already out of time. I have a final question as well.
We can answer this very quick question. The harder job will be with the Prime Minister, because as I told you, the Article 20 of the Constitution says le gouvernement détermine et conduit la politique de la nation. So, if the President is not supported by the parliamentary elections, the Prime Ministers will rule. If he can rule by decrees without even consulting the President. Only for big matters like treaties, wars, things like that, you have to consult the President. Not to rule the country. So he will be, and these reforms that were done by Charles de Gaulle, that I have been talking about in '58, were done when he was Prime Minister. He was Prime Minister for 6 months before becoming the President in beginning of '59.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your question. Final question. Tonight is the big first debate between Le Pen and Macron. Where are you going to watch?
At home, on my couch, with my tablet and iPhone.
With wine.
Will you be in Paris already tonight?
Yeah, I will just, I left my scooter in Le Gare du Nord, so I will run to watch it with friends. It will be, of course, a big, because that both of them are really good orators.
So it's going to be an exciting debate.
So it will be quite exciting. They're being preparing. It will be a beautiful, very interesting political show.
Yes.
They can grab 2 or 3 points, 2 points in this show. I don't predict that any of them would collapse. I exclude that. Because
as I heard you earlier, Macron has to have a tough voice.
And I will drink a bottle of pomme roll, which is some Bordeaux Rhine on the...
Okay, very good.
I hope both
very
of you enjoy the debate tonight.
Before we thank our guests, I want to tell you that on the 19th of May, we have a session on the impact of the blockchain, the technology behind Bitcoin. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want a warm round of applause for both of our guests, Renaud Girard and Saskia Houttuin.